This episode of Pomcast is sponsored by Pearl Soho. Since 2002, Pearl Soho has inspired knitters around the world with their fresh approach to traditional needlecrafts.
They're known for their spectacular colour, natural fibres, and approachable patterns. They love to knit as much as we do. At pearlsoho.com, you can find tons of free patterns. They're really great. I've definitely knit several of them. And there's tutorials as well. And you'll also find all the supplies you need to cast on.
Here at Pom Pom, we especially love Pearl's gorgeous selection of yarns. And in our Winter 2021 issue, Adela Dutra used Pearl Soho's worsted twist for her very striking pink noise pullover. An absolutely beautiful 100% merino wool, it's fair trade certified and meets the rigorous responsible wool standard, a progressive approach to holistic animal welfare and land management that allows for complete traceability from farmer to mill. And we love that.
We do love that. And you know what else we love? We love that Pearl Soho is offering our listeners a 15% discount off their next order of Pearl Soho brand yarn, fabric, or notions. Just enter the code POMCASTFEB at checkout. So you need to go to pearlsoho.com, use the code POMCASTFEB when placing your order, and hey, that's 15% off. It's that easy. Just note that this offer can't be combined with any other discounts. I mean, that seems fair, Lydia.
Seems more than fair. In fact, I think I will be using this discount.
Nice. On to the podcast.
Hello!
Hello. Hi and Happy New Year. Welcome back to Pomcast, the podcast produced by Pom Pom Quarterly. I'm Sophie Heathscott and I'm joined with Lydia Gluck. Hi.
Hi, Soph. How you doing?
I'm good. Welcome back. Does it feel good to be back in the podcast groove?
It really does. And as it happens, it's a beautiful sunny day here in Norwich. Got the weather report ready.
Nice. The book I'm reading at the moment, they give a metaphor where there are two types of people. There's people who are weather forecasters, they're the planners, right? They see the weather coming, and other people are the weather. They are just the wind and they just come in and do their thing.
Ooh, which do you feel like you are?
I don't know. I feel maybe I'm a weather forecaster. I don't know.
I feel like you're pretty good at planning overall.
Hmm.
I would say that. But either way, I'm enjoying starting the recording of this episode and also 2022 with some nice sunshine, although it is brisk and it has been very windy. Additional weather information there for everyone.
So, yes, we're back. We hope you are well and looking after yourselves. We're back with the next season of the Pomcast, and we're starting this episode with an interview.
We are indeed. So, for this episode, our first one back, as we've said, we are interviewing the wonderful Lydia Morrow. Another Lydia, I hear you say. Whoa. But yes, so Lydia Morrow is possibly known to you as What Lydia Made on Instagram. And she also has worked with us. She directed the photo shoot and modelled in the shoot for our winter issue of last year. That was issue number 39. And we had a really wonderful chat with her, which was recorded before we recorded this intro. So we already know how great it is.
Yeah, it was a real joy to talk to Lydia all about her textile work, her views on creativity and making. It's a real treat to speak to someone so passionate and engaged with I was going to say the world of making, aren't we all? I hope we are. I hope listening you are. But if not, why not dive into Lydia's world for a little bit? We're so pleased to have her on the podcast.
Absolutely. So pleased to work with her through Pom Pom and to have her wonderful voice on this podcast joining ours. So I guess without too much further ado, we should hand over to past Lydia and Sophie and Lydia Morrow.
Well, hi and welcome, Pomcats. Here we are chatting to another Lydia. How great to double up on a Lydia. We have Lydia Morrow as our guest on the podcast today. Hi, Lydia.
Hi, it's nice to speak with you.
And of course, we have Lydia Gluck.
Hello.
Hello.
Your regular Lydia's here. Special guest Lydia also
Yeah,
here.
if I'm asking a question, it's to Lydia Morrow.
I mean, the 2 Lydia voices are very different, so I think we'll figure it out.
Yeah, they're probably more different than mine and Sophie's voices, so
Yeah.
hopefully it'll be
It's cool, we're interchangeable, it's fine. Well, we always like to say we always like to start with a little intro, and we'd like you to introduce yourself, Lydia, to the Pomcats. Sort of who you are, what you do, the elevator pitch of your life and work. What do you tell people?
So, obviously, I'm Lydia Morrow, as you said, but most people tend to know of me as What Lydia Made. I'm, like, always really, it's like there's so much, like, messed up capitalist stuff wrapped up in the word influencer. But, like, that's, like, a lot of my job is kind of, like, knit related or, like, ethical fashion related influencing, like, styling, making. I mean, I would like to call myself a designer, but people tend to refer to me as an influencer, and I'm a bit like, "Ugh." But, yeah, I design things, I make things. I kind of am just all over the place doing whatever strikes my fancy at the time.
When I was, I have to admit, we googled you before the show, obviously. I kept seeing the term fashion clown.
Yeah, I do call myself a fashion clown quite a lot.
What does that mean to you?
Well, I guess it's like there's something about being outside of like the size of most fashion that I end up like, as much as it's like my special interest is like fashion and like what I wear and stuff like that. I don't follow fashion at all. So, like, I have no like, if I were to say I was, like, a fashion person or in the fashion industry, that's, like, kind of inaccurate because 'cause I'm not really connected to it at all. Like, maybe I would say I was in the ethical fashion industry a bit, but even then, it's only such a small corner, and I tend to not, like, follow or know much about what's going on in fashion that's not my size and my style, which just becomes this really tiny little amount of the fashion world. And I think that fashion clown kind of covers it because it looks weird and clowny. But do you want to hear a funny story about it?
Always.
Yes.
I was like a really, really early talker and kind of creeped my parents out because I learned to talk when I was like 1 and like sentences. And my parents would be like, okay, good night, Lydia. And I would go, don't talk to Lydia, talk to Clown. And my mom was always like, oh no.
Wow. Kids can be so creepy sometimes, can't they?
Yeah, I was adamant that my name was Clown for quite a while, and now I'm like, I can reclaim this. My style's kind of clowny. Maybe I am a clown.
It's kind of great that even at your very young age, you were like, "I identify with clowns." I
Yeah.
feel like me and clowns, like, we're on the same level.
Yeah.
Love that. I also, I think what you're saying about, kind of not feeling connected to the fashion industry, I feel like for a lot of my sort of time that I've been interested in clothes, I always kind of didn't really know how to express that because I was like, I just really like clothes, but I'm not really that interested in like fashion, which isn't to say that I'm not influenced by fashion because I feel like that would be just like untrue to say that I like have never seen things out in the world and thought like, oh, that's nice. But it's just like the joy of clothes being fun rather than following a kind of specific fashion route.
Yeah, I'm always kind of surprised by how prescriptive fashion becomes the more you get into like standard fashion kind of discourse. I'm like, this is a bit boring now.
Yeah, I feel that the word like adding the word clown onto fashion does make it fun, right?
Yeah, right. I don't even think I'm that into clowns. Like,
Should we move away from the clowns now?
I mean, my grandma was a clown at one point, so it's in the family.
Cool.
Wow.
That's so nice. Maybe that's why you were so sort of connected to clowns when you were little. Because my
Maybe.
my grandma was a librarian, and when I was little, I was like really obsessed with being a librarian and was desperate to be a librarian. That was like
Oh,
my whole, I was
was
like, that's all I want from my life is to stamp books.
absolutely one of my dreams. I was like, I can be a librarian and I can read all day and I can have all the books that I want.
I was going to say, just like making a knitting magazine, you can knit all day, you know.
Yeah. I just wonder what the kids who want to be librarians to kids who knit pipeline, or to adults who are in the knitting industry pipeline is like.
Like, yeah, how many of us were like,
I
I want to be a
imagine it's
librarian?
pretty big. Like,
Yeah, we should do an unofficial poll somewhere, shouldn't we?
yeah.
Yeah.
Get some. We got to get that data, that hard data
Yeah.
on there. Yeah. So I mean, obviously, as Sophie said, we did a bit of googling of you for this, but also before we even worked with you, you had caught our eye on Instagram as what Lydia made, and we've always been huge fans of everything that you've posted, like all the color schemes, and you've always got really interesting, thoughtful things to say, as well as like fun, silly things to say, and it's just always a really like a joy to be kind of keeping up to date with you. And it was because of all those things that we contacted you to collaborate with you on our issue 39 shoot, so for the rhythm issue, and we really enjoyed that collaboration. But we were wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the process for you, kind of behind the scenes, and how the shoot came together.
Yeah. It's so hard, like, so kind of like weird getting over the embarrassment of just like sitting quietly while someone says really nice things about you. I'm just like, oh my gosh, oh my goodness. This is very sweet. But I think I was like, feeling like the exact same way when you guys got in touch about that. I was like, now, you sent this email to the correct person, not like some other person who knows what they're doing. And you guys were like, no, definitely you. And I was just like, oh, okay. But it was so fun. I feel like I did a little bit of like I a lot of the way that I end up working is so like immediate. I feel like I had it in my head like almost instantaneously. What like after I looked at the Pinterest board, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I know what it is." And I had all these friends, like it's so cool. It was so cool to get to work with like people who I've wanted to work with in my kind of like secondhand and ethical fashion and like design community, especially in Glasgow, but like hadn't been able to work with or haven't been able to afford using their space yet, or like things like that. Like we did the shoot in my friend Laura's furniture warehouse, and she's a mid-century furniture salesperson, so she curates it's called Habib. I should probably say that. She curates mid-century stuff and has this new like beautiful showroom with all of these little like vignettes set up, because she's really skilled at just like almost set dressing to help people understand how the furniture would sit in their house. And I was like, this is the one. It has to be this. It would be so perfect, because the vibe of the knits was just like this. I always think pom pom hits this amazing halfway between like really traditional and really like cool and edgy. Not that I love traditional stuff, but you know what I mean. Like, and by cool, I more mean like new and cutting edge. And I think that way that the pom pom patterns is like sitting right there in the center reminds me so much of like mid-century furniture, because it like never goes out of style, and it always has these like classic really traditional lines and like good craftsmanship and stuff, but just like has this enduring coolness that you can't get away from. So anyway, I could talk about
Thank
my
you.
Yeah, I was like, now I feel embarrassed because someone's saying nice things.
So yeah, I thought we would do that. We had a kind of nightmare with the second model. I was like had my heart set on her because she's a friend of a friend and was really nice and just obviously incredibly beautiful. And then she got COVID and it was very stressful. Like, oh my gosh, is she going to be able to do it? But everything actually worked out really well. And we got to do all of the styling for the whole thing with pieces borrowed from like ethical makers that I love, like people who actually make their clothes in the UK as well. Um, which I thought was just really fun and cool. And obviously, it's not like really obvious necessarily in the magazine. Like the styling is nice, but you wouldn't know that everything was made in the UK. And I just thought it was so cool to add that little extra bit of like more amazing craftsmanship that's happening here just to like double down on the cool handmade vibe. um but yeah, I don't know, like what else would you like to know about that process? Is there
I guess you were a model as well as sort of coordinating the shoot. What was that process like for you?
Oh my gosh. There was definitely a couple moments where I was like, "Okay." So, I'm doing 6 jobs or something right now. But, I mean, you guys at least Lydia will know, but, thankfully, you guys were generous and understanding and let me hire somebody to help with PAing on the day, which was, like, invaluable because it was I think if I had been modeling and directing at the same time, I would have just, uh, had my head explode. But, yeah, it was like we were shooting for winter in the middle of August. It was really hot.
Yeah. I've been there before. It's quite, it's
Yeah,
yeah.
challenging.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the showroom had, like, a big garage door thing that came up completely open, so it was only, like, 3 walls, but definitely by the end of it, like, after changing clothes so many times, I was just like, "I am going to die." And then something did die, which was all of the batteries that the photographer had.
Oh, no.
But
I
it
forgot
was
about that.
Yeah.
thankfully, we only had, like, a few more shots to do, and Laura obviously is a friend, and she was so nice and was like, "Don't worry about it, come back tomorrow, and we'll sort it out," and it was mostly just, like, the flat lays and the stills, and we were like, "Okay, we actually can do that without the whole team." I think we took a few pictures of, like, the backs of some garments, and I was like, "Ugh, you don't have to see my face, it'll be fine." And then we did do one other stupid thing, which was we photographed a hat inside out.
Also have done that
Yeah,
before.
Oh,
back to front
oh
things,
Yes.
my
yeah.
gosh, it's so pretty on the inside though, that hat pattern. I really thought I think it's because I folded up the brim and the rib looked the right way out, and I was like, "Yes, correct."
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It all
Anyway.
came together. It was a beautiful, fantastic end product, so yeah, we were delighted, and,
Yes,
I'm so
absolutely.
glad. There was definitely, like, the chaos mode at the end when I was, like, shooting the hat in my girlfriend's flat, like, "This magazine had better look okay." But we did it, we made it. I saw it in person the other day, and my husband was really embarrassing and was like, "She creative directed that magazine," and then the people who ran the yarn shop were like, "Can we take a picture with you?" And I was like, "Ah,
Aw.
you're in the magazine." I felt very, I felt very embarrassed, but then I was like, that was very sweet that he told them.
I mean, you
Yeah.
threw around the word influencer earlier. That seems like influencer territory, doesn't it, you know? And no bad thing. I mean, why not? So we talked at the beginning, you introduced yourself, you said, "I'm a maker, I'm a designer." I wanted to ask you why it's so important for you to make your own clothes, and what is the benefit of making your own wardrobe that you don't think gets enough credit?
I've been thinking about this, and I think it's just, like, literally I feel like right now there's a lot of talk about maybe, like, making your own wardrobe to avoid fast fashion, making your wardrobe to, like, get a new skill or hobby, and I think, like, a little bit less of the you can literally make whatever you want is like, it's a little bit less talked about because I think also there's, like, so many better, more interesting patterns available, and, like, you can just, like, see something on Instagram and want to copy it or whatever, but whenever I start making stuff, I'm always just like, I can make whatever I want, like literally whatever I want. I could put like the entire contents of my favorite book on a scarf and like just be able to wear that. And like, I just remember the times when I didn't really know how to make things, I'm like, oh, I really want, like, when I was a kid and wanted to be a librarian, I always wanted t-shirts that had like books on them instead of bands. And I was like, why can't I do that? And I'm like, now I could do that so easily. I could make a little lino cut of a book or get some transfer and make a t-shirt. And I'm like, oh, it's so fun and so exciting. But also, like on a more serious note, because I am a fat person, like because fashion for fat people is so limited, it's kind of like there's a very clear, like, this is what fat people are allowed to wear, in a way that it isn't quite the same for like, obviously, we talked about fashion being fairly prescriptive no matter what size you are when you get into the cycle, but if you have enough money and you're below a certain dress size, you can kind of find most things, whereas if you're fat, it's like you could have thousands of pounds to blow and you would still have to get something custom made. And so having the capacity to do that yourself is really validating. I mean, sometimes it gets me down because I'm like, I can't have anything unless I make it myself, which becomes a kind of opposite burden. But I'm like never stop having ideas for new clothes that I want to make into this world. So it's amazing being able to make them myself. I'm so excited that I was able to learn knitting again. Like, oh, it's just the scope is so incredible.
When you say learn again, is it sort of a craft that you've revisited then?
Yeah, I learned when I was, like, 7, and I used to knit at school and stuff, but I, like, hate learning stuff what I call the right way. Like, I just don't like to learn the right way, and it really bothers me to have to, like, sit down and learn it. So, I was like, "I'm just gonna get really good at knitting scarves and squares, and that's all I'm gonna do because I don't wanna learn patterns." And then I picked up patterns in, like, 1st year of art school, and like, wanted to throw a fit because it was so stressful to look at. I was like, "I can't. This is so technical. I'm not gonna look at this again." And then I tried knitting, and my hands were in so much pain, and I was like, "No." And then 4 years later, I was like, "You know what? I have been crocheting for 6 years, and I cannot make the things that I want to make because it's just a different medium, and I want to knit. I'm going to see if there are ways that I can make knitting accessible to me, and I have figured it out. It's been about a year, and I'm back into it, and it's very exciting."
It is exciting. I was gonna ask this sort of like tangential
Oh,
thing,
that's
but
fine.
I feel when you said about the photo shoot and you were like instinctually you're like, "Yep, that's the thing." I feel like from what I see from your Instagram, and I know it's Instagram, it's not real life, that your projects do seem kind of very instinctive and like, "I'm gonna make the thing and I'm just gonna work it out as I go." Is that kind of your process?
Oh, totally, yeah. Like, I went to art school, and it was like you're supposed to like, because it's a very hard thing to grade, you know? Lydia, you're in art school right now, aren't you?
I am, yes, and
Yeah.
I still, they give us learning objectives, and they obviously work really hard on trying to explain to us how they grade us, but it's still kind of a mystery to
They're
me.
really
Like,
yeah, but I think they're also like, I remember my tutors just being like, "You have to make a sketchbook just so that we can say that we saw that you had a process,
yes,
because we
exactly.
have to
Yeah.
grade something, and if we just look at it objectively and don't like it, that's not a way like, we don't have to like or be interested in your work for you to get a good grade here." And I
Mhm.
was like, "Ugh." So, I used to always,
You do the
like,
thing of
make
doing it
my
backwards.
Oh, totally, yeah, doing my sketchbooks after I finished my pieces, and I was like, "Ugh," and then I would get too bored, and I would just, like, find a bunch of relevant books and put Post-its in them and stick them out for assessment, like, "I read these books. Here's the Post-its. Please see that I did something." But, yeah, I just think, like, learning in that way, that, like, immediate way for me works so much better because I also, like, the more that I plan and the more that I do diagrams and, like, think about stuff, the more overwhelmed I get, and actually working it out as it goes is like more fun for me. I'm trying to teach that to my kid. He's like, I did this drawing wrong, so I'm gonna scribble over it. And I'm like, no, the mistakes are part of the process. And he's like, no, they're not. But he's 4, so
Yeah. I feel like that I can relate to that, like wanting to just start a thing when you've had the idea, and that it's that kind of desire and joy, like desire to make and joy in the process of making, that drives the whole process. And it is kind of amazing what you can make and learn if you like really want the end product, or
yeah.
if you know.
Yeah. I think that's like why I just can't do like working and learning in the way of like making little samples, like because I briefly in art school I did do like a textiles induction into printing because I was allowed to. But like I was joining a group of textile students and they had these like folders full of samples and that was like all that they were making. And maybe like I don't know. I wasn't a textile student, but it seemed I think as far as I can remember, they were making like one actual product at the end of the term. And I was just like, how can you learn how to be a textile designer this way? Like, obviously you can, but I just think it kind of sucks the joy out of it. Like,
It's one of those things, isn't it, where it's like people have such different processes
well,
and
that's
such,
what I was gonna say.
yeah, different ways of doing things. But I really relate to, like, I find it very difficult to do things in a systematic way, and
Mhm.
like to do that kind of sampling. And I also did some inductions in various things in art school recently, and I was just like, you know, in the dye kitchens and dye workshops, they're like, if you're dyeing for industry, if you're like developing a color for industry, you need to have really precise
Yeah.
recipes, right? And that makes total sense. But that's not what I'm doing. So I was just like, I don't want to do it like that.
Yeah.
I just want to, I'm just making art. So it doesn't matter. I'm just going to mix up whatever colors. And like, I remember one of the technicians was like, oh, so what are you working on today? I was like, I'm dyeing the colors of what it feels like to swim in a river. And she was like, okay.
Mm.
Like, she was really nice about it. She was just like, oh, okay, cool. And I was like, yes, I sound ridiculous.
That's that school, baby.
Yeah, I
Oh,
know.
yeah.
It's just like, I've arrived.
So, but it's like, yeah, it is about like, because I think the way that I talk about it, I'm so like bemused that it sounds like I'm putting it down. I'm just like, I didn't I didn't even know people could learn that way. It's so like not how I function, but I come from a family that's like every single person has a different sort of neurodivergence. So it's a I'm aware that acutely aware that we all learn and process things in almost the opposite ways sometimes. It's just really funny. Um, but I love jumping in headfirst into projects. My new rule, I wrote a blog post about this the other day. My new rule is like I am allowed to start any project that I want and there's absolutely no pressure to finish any project and I can start them whenever I want, but I have to review like monthly and unravel all the projects that I'm not going to finish. And that makes me like it keeps me like I'm always inspired and I never have that like, oh, I have to finish this thing that I hate. And then when you're unraveling the work, even though it's kind of sad, you're already so inspired about a different project. And you suddenly get this yarn back and you're like, oh my gosh, I have so many ideas for this yarn, a different idea. And the pressure is off. And that's like what has started really working for me. I mean, I have ADHD, so it's like a very very ADHD way of getting through. But yes, I've completely lost the thread. I've just
No, it's great. It sounds like a great way to motivate yourself, that kind of rule. Like, I put the rule in myself, like, I have no works in progress at the end of the year or, like, one work in progress. But now I'm like, well, maybe I should just cancel everything.
I think there's like a really obviously like in my life I'm going through like as an adult, I'm 26, so I haven't been an adult for that long. And I'm totally going through the like process of like, learning to draw my own lines where things are like kind of needlessly moralized.
Mhm.
And I think in knitting, that thing of like, you're only allowed to have one project and you have to finish everything you start is like one of those things that's just so needlessly moralized because people always don't finish their knitting projects for like 1,000,000,000 reasons. And then it's like this weight around people's necks, and then it's years and they haven't unraveled the project and they have this guilt for no reason. And they have like a sweater's worth of amazing yarn they could use for something else. And you're just like, this is not helping people. Like, obviously, it doesn't need to be this like manic process like me, but like on the smaller scale, the idea of like forcing yourself to have to finish every project and like not work on too many at once is like, I'm like, that's fine for some people. It's not a moral failing if you can't do that. But I don't see a lot of people talking like that about it.
And it's interesting. Maybe it's a whole other discussion for another podcast. I
Yeah,
felt for me there was things that were sad that I was like, this is sad. I need to like let it go now and get it unraveled. And that was more like, yeah, like
Yeah.
you say, freeing.
It's a fraught subject.
yeah. It reminds me of there's like a I don't know, I probably got this on a different podcast. There's like a concept in I think in economics theory called sunk costs,
Mhm.
where like if you feel like you've sunk, like maybe you bought some like gig
Yeah.
tickets and then on the day you're like, I actually don't want to go, but because I've spent the money, I feel like I have to.
Right.
And it's like, regardless of whether you go, you've sunk, that cost is sunk. So you should probably just do
Mhm.
whatever you want. It's that kind of like, you just, and it's like, yeah, so you knit half the jumper. So then you feel like you have to finish it because you've sunk that time and energy into it. But actually, knitting the second half, if you don't want to, it's not, that's like, doesn't, you don't have to spend your time like that just because you feel like you started the thing. And I think it's quite a useful
Yeah.
way to just be like, yeah, I've changed my mind and that's fine. Changing your mind is like a really healthy, like normal thing to do.
Yeah.
And also like you say, it's not, there's no reason for it to be a moral
Mm.
thing, like whether or not you finish a like pair of socks.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it
Changing
feels right, then
Yeah.
if it feels the right choice for you, then yeah.
Changing your mind is another of those things though, isn't it? Like, that is needlessly moralized. It's like, "Yeah, but you said you were gonna do this," and it's like, obviously, like, if you're letting a lot of people down and stuff like that, that's kind of a different thing, but also you don't have to do everything that you've ever said you'll do. But, yes, I love giving up on projects now. This is my new thing. This last 6 months since I let myself do this, I love unraveling, and it's so weird, but also it's that thing of learning in an atypical way, and everybody can learn in that way. Like, everyone learns by making half a jumper, and thinking of it as time spent learning and, like, building new skills is totally like, you can just be like, "Okay, that's my old maths daughter, but in jumper form. Do I really wanna keep that and, like, make sure I finish every problem in my old maths daughter? Not really." This is kind of a weird metaphor, but you know what I mean.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's good.
Oh boy.
So you mentioned that when you picked knitting back up again as an adult, you were experiencing pain in your hands, and that you found a way to kind of work around that so that you could make the things you wanted to make. And we wondered if you had any top tips for people who can't knit or crochet for long periods of time due to pain or disability, and any top tips for picking yarns or patterns for people with sensory issues.
Yeah. So I'll just talk through the adjustments that I made. So the biggest one, I think, like, I had never knitted anything in the round. So that's like, I just hadn't any experience with round needles. So obviously this is not really relevant to people who already use round needles and struggle. But like, the change from a flat needle to a round needle was revolutionary for me because like I always work flat on round needles now because it distributes the weight so much. So if you have issues, like, a lot of my issues are majority in my wrists. And with the round needle, I can kind of rest it on my tummy. Well, also maybe this is like the one instance in the world of fat privilege. I have a nice little knitting shelf built in. But yeah, like the weight is distributed in the center and you can kind of rest it on your body rather than having it all out. Like when a piece is on one needle and out at the end of the needle, it's just so much unnecessary strain because you can just use a round needle. And then I kind of like, and obviously these tips are only for somebody who's has kind of the same process as me, because obviously people with completely different needs. But like I knit previously with a sort of like tight to medium gauge, and everyone has their different ways, but really like changing your gauge is kind of like learning how to knit again. And I kind of just I like worked really really hard on becoming a loose knitter, which has helped so much because adjusting from like when you're a tight knitter, there's tension on your hands all the time, and it's a lot of pulling and a lot of pushing, and loosening the gauge obviously gives you this like fluidity with your motion that's so much easier. And then when I was going through that, because it's so hard when you're used to knitting fairly tight, like to not let everything fall off your needles. I was also using like square needles for arthritis and stuff. Um, and they like now I don't actually use them. I just make sure I have good quality needles. But they help they helped the stitches like stay on a little better, and like making that adjustment without like usually if you're changing the way you knit, you're also really tense because you're worried things are going to mess up, and having those kinds of needles really helped me like not be tense while I was trying to adjust this is so technical that like
Sometimes it
It's the
is,
right
yeah.
audience for it.
yeah. And then like I have like completely banned in knitting, I've completely banned cheap needles, like, because any kind of needle that the yarn is like having friction on, or like there's like too much bend to it, or things like that, it's just causes so much unnecessary strain. And I just like wouldn't, sometimes it's hard to prioritize that kind of thing. But I was like, these crappy needles are actually like hurting me. And it's like just being more intentional about that. Also, I have had to stop knitting with cotton because I've realized that's probably like cotton and straight needles, I think was like my main killers. And I love cotton and I love how it feels, but it's just there's just no give. And I had never really thought about it until I did a project with like acrylic for a client or something, and I was like, excuse me. I have knitted for so many hours and it's fine. What's happening right now? And I just realized like yarns that have like a built-in give just have so much more like relaxation capacity. And I think like for me, because I don't do great with scratchy wool, I number one was like never wool ever. I think I'm allergic to it, which I think I was just getting, like, eczema from being so bothered. Getting, like, sweaty and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Just sweaty hands on wool is just, like, such a horrible combination. But, and then I was like, acrylic is bad for the environment and it's always uncomfortable, because I think I had only experienced, like, uh, whatchamacallit, like a scratchy secondhand acrylic yarn. And now I'm like, I guess there's just such an ongoing progress of learning to be intersectional and to be like give yourself a break. Where like I mostly actually use like kind of superwash merino, which is also not good for the environment. And then acrylic is actually like such an accessible material for a lot of disabled people. It's comfortable, or it can be comfortable, and it's soft and easy to use and stretchy and like not hard on the hands. And I was just like, I had completely discounted this in that kind of like way that we often are when we're not feeling super, when we're not being, when we have this tunnel vision towards our field of activism, where I'm like in ethical fashion and stuff like that, and I'm like, never use an unnatural fiber ever. There's no room for it. And like now I'm like, well, that was like the plastic straws. Where is the accessibility in that? Like, there are people who need this and there's a purpose for it. And like having an intersectional practice and approach means recognizing the utility of all of the things and just figuring out what's like the appropriate use for them. So I think like, yeah, changing to stretchy fibers. If that's something that you feel like you need to do, audience, give yourself a break. It's totally fine. And, you know, like the incredible amount of effort that goes into making something for yourself and hand making, like, you know, that's not going to be a normal garment that gets thrown away on a landfill. It's not the same thing. And I think just giving, I think disabled makers, because because we're like against our own will thrown into like activism to, you know, exist. Disabled and marginalized makers often find themselves in this immense amount of pressure to check every single box, and it's just like having some grace for yourself that like you're allowed to have your own access needs. But again, that was a little tangent. But in terms of sensory stuff, I would still always say cotton. I was like unbelievably surprised by like superwash merino. I just didn't believe it. When I was inexperienced before, I was like, no, it's not. It can't be comfy. It's still wool. And then now I'm like, actually, no, it's great. Uh, but I also find like knitting projects like kind of like along the lines of like Jessie May's patterns, and hers were some of the ones that I like really got into when I was first starting, because well, number one, it's great if you don't have patience, because they tend to use like a slightly wider gauge, like a thicker needle and thinner yarn, but that also makes them wearable. So finding patterns that have like, if you're using a wool yarn that you're like, ugh, this is on the edge for me, making like a lightweight thing that's not super fitted, that has a lot of like holes in it because of the gauge, is just like so much easier to wear comparatively to like a really dense jumper. Because like I would still struggle with a really dense wool jumper, whereas a really lightweight one isn't going to have the same sensory impact. So hopefully that's helpful. Sorry, I kind of like droned on there.
This is what we are here for. We're big ears waiting for this. I love also that you address the audience. I don't know if we've had anyone say that. Like, listen, audience, here's the deal, and I love that.
Oh my gosh, I'm always on. It's like I feel like I'm always like turning around to the camera, like.
Oh yeah, like just like fourth wall. Like.
Yeah.
We talked about your sort of space that you have in ethical / slow / fashion. What is it that you'd like to see more in that space?
Everything, just more
Yeah.
of it. I think like, I guess like what I was talking about is true. Like I would like to see more intersectionality with it, like, and I guess like it, a lot of the spaces that I'm in are quite intersectional, but as soon as I kind of like, that's quite a small number of like specific brands and like organizations and stuff, and as soon as you step out of it, you get back into this like, we're ethical because we've done this. And like, number one, I think people probably need to stop saying that they're ethical all the time.
Mhm.
Because it's like, I think I think because of the pressure in the activism world to be perfect, which is hard to get away from, and, like, a very mixed bag because of course, you wish everyone was perfect. Like,
But
nobody's
what is that perfect?
Yeah.
Everyone's got a different ideal of what that is anyway,
Mm.
so
People just yeah, that's not achievable, and, like, it puts this immense amount of pressure for people to, like, project that they're perfect and to, like, say, "Because I made sensible for the environment and for people changes, I'm ethical," and it's like, "Oh, yeah, I mean, there's a million ways you can be unethical, and there's a million ways you can be ethical," like, to slap a tag on it and say, "I'm ethical, I'm responsible," is quite a lot, but I think that because from the, like, audience, there's the pressure, like, "Are you ethical then?" Then there's, like, a pressure to say, "Yes, yes, yes, yes. Yes, I am. And here's how." And I think, like, a little less of that and a little more of, like, looking to find out how to actually be intersectional. And, like, because like, I see it a lot in, like, the ethical fashion, for lack of a better word, like, community in Scotland. There's a lot of people who say they're ethical and don't make fat sizes, or would say, this is an example I always like, is saying that you're sustainable and not making plus sizes. And I'm like, okay, sure, but the human population is getting bigger, and you're only making designs for, like, less than half of the human population. Is that sustainable? How would you like and, you're probably overproducing for small sizes and not making anything for bigger sizes. Is that sustainable? Like, that's, like, a slightly different interpretation of the word, but still, like, the overproduction of clothes for small sizes when there aren't clothes for big people is not a sustainable thing. Uh, so I think just, like, seeing a little bit more of, like, a wider I guess it's like a wider perspective with, like, less of the pressure to say that you're perfect first thing into the thing. I would just like to see a little bit more, like, humbleness and perspective from people, I guess. Like, having obviously the, like, this is very dangerous zone of the, like, we're still learning white lady vibe. That's
Mm,
not what I'm talking about. But I do think, like, there is like, the acknowledgement that you're not perfect and that you are still learning, not in a harmful way, is really important. I think it's so hard. I'm like, you end up having to couch it in so many things, but these bits of language that have been so important get co-opted in this way where you're like, the term "I'm still learning" to me, it makes my hackles go up now because it's used as an excuse so often by people who
mm,
are just being like, "I'm still learning so I can do whatever I want." But it's actually, like, so useful and true, and I think maybe using that kind of wording to yourself and actually listening to yourself instead of putting that out there in a way that ends up being harmful to people, reminding yourself, "I'm still learning. I don't need to be perfect right now, but I am still learning. I need to try to not see myself as this perfect person who knows better than everyone else," is, like, so important. So, I don't know. It's just this balance. It's so hard. And I think, like, I really hate the stuff that's like, "Ugh, the left is over policing itself, blah, 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 hyper woke, whatever," where I'm like, okay, this is, like, on the edge of becoming racist. What are you doing? But but it's like, I don't know. It's so hard because there's just such a fine line. But I would like to see, I just see, like, a lot of, like, earth centric, not people centric dialogue that is, like, really progressive in certain ways, but then, like, completely ignores the physical cost on people. So anyway, that really went 10 types of sideways, but I think there's, like, some clear thread there.
that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Also, I really like the phrase 10 types of sideways. I might try and I might try and keep that.
I was thinking that. I
That's
just
a good one.
that's
It's gonna be the new
made that made
It's a
that up
the new
good
on the spot.
tagline for the podcast now.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um, not that long ago, you posted on Instagram a picture of a top that you had made and you had embroidered "You and I are Earth" onto it, and I immediately recognized it because it has to be a good 10 years ago. I saw that plate on display at the Welcome collection.
Mhm.
I actually don't know whether that same like typography and wording is also elsewhere, but I remember seeing it on a plate in the Welcome collection, and I don't remember what the exhibition was, but I remember just like absolutely loving it. I have an old notebook that I like meticulously copied it out on the front of that I still have. And when I saw this top that you'd made, I was just like, oh my god, I've never seen anyone else like who like
Brazenly
yeah,
copy.
yeah, who was like as into this like weird plate as me, and it really it was really exciting. But all of this to say that you often use like imagery and text on your clothing, and we wanted you to tell us a little bit about that relationship between imagery and text and how you use it on your clothing.
Yeah, okay. Um, I actually think, right, like the reaction to that jumper, well, top kind of thing, and the reaction like to the play as it like continuously circulates and recirculates around the internet is so visceral. And I think it actually like that reaction specifically to that specific thing kind of explains a lot of why I like to use text in my clothes. I think like there's different ways to use text on clothing, and some of them are a lot less effective than others. But like, I don't, I sometimes very occasionally in lockdown wrote some poetry, and I'm not necessarily like, it's not a thing that I am super confident about. Like, I like doing it, but it's not something I have a lot of practice or skill at. But I have like, there's words and phrases that kind of hit your heart and just make you feel something that isn't, it's not just a word, you know? And I kind of like use like playing with these like it's I guess the word is poignant, like words and phrases that have this like just really heavy hitting meaning as soon as you kind of think about it, and you can tell that it's kind of not necessarily universal, but like has so many ways to be interpreted that it's going to really like touch someone's heart. It's very sappy, but like I like to use words. Like even I made a piece that just said, "Why do you want more?" And like to me, I was taking some lyrics from a song because it was a commission based on a song. But I was like, this phrase is so it's so much. It has so many feelings in it. Like it's like, why do you want more? It feels like I'm so much and not enough, or like what like I'm giving so much, or like why do you want more of me? Why do you want more from me? Like there's just so many elements, and then it like people can interpret it as like capitalism, or like it's just like everybody can kind of relate to the feeling of not being enough. And so like phrases like that, and like the "you and I are earth," like I actually think that play is supposed to say "you and I are earths," but it's worn out.
Mm.
But I'm really interested in like folklore in folklore in in
It's like
folklore.
legends about cutlery, is it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
You know, it's got to be canonical or I'm not into it. um Sorry, that was so stupid. Okay. In like folklore, like a lot of at least like British, well, most of the world, because like not everyone's been literate for a long time. A lot of our like folklore is an oral tradition. And so part of the reason, so I love using those words that are like powerful and have a kind of like instant connection to people's hearts is lovely. And obviously that in itself is powerful, and that's like a piece of art. You want a reaction. But I also really like the way like it relates back to our oral tradition, especially in like Scotland, of like the way that storytelling is like embellished and mixed in with like whatever the storyteller has found to be the most interesting part, or they thought they could tell it better, so they've added their own little twist on the story. And like we have, recorded probably like thousands of versions of each traditional folktale all over like the entire world, and they're almost the same story, but they've just been like adapted for different cultures or adapted for different storytellers, and like whatever is the most interesting or important part or scary part to that person, they add their own meaning to it. And so I quite like, you and I are earth. For me, some of that is about when I put that on a garment, a lot of that was about the garment. And like I was thinking about like the actual earth, and like how the garment was made out of secondhand like polyester acrylic yarn, and it would never go away. And I would and the text on the garment was made out of wool, and I was like, me and this wool will become the earth, and then this garment won't, and it's just going to be here. And that to me, I was like, oh, my heart. It's so poignant and like weird and sad, and like what is this like relationship that we have to this material, and like how clothing is. I think about this, I think it's like a philosophical term of like calling an object an actant, because we think of objects as like without agency, but they actually do quite a lot on their own. And I can't remember what book it was from, but there was this book that was talking about the example of like anything you throw in the bin. And it was like, well, a piece of rubbish can become a home to a creature, or it can become a polluter, like it gives off things, or it becomes a different material as it changes, or it melds with other material. Like all kinds of materials in the dump become toxic waste together. And none of that is in relation to you as a person or any person. It does this on its own. Like it's still an actant. Objects are not like passive little nonsense things. They have a life of their own. And I like the idea of like communicating with your clothes as an actant, and thinking of them as a part of the conversation, not just something that you control. But then obviously like you and I are earth, like people feel that way. That's community. Other people can look at that and be like, oh, that's about me and my community, or like that's about me and the person I love, or that's like me and my inner dialogue. There's so many other ways that it can be interpreted. So I like that, because it also to me like vibes with this like neurodivergent way of processing that's kind of like chaotic and doesn't necessarily research everything thoroughly, but still like can take the feeling of one object and put it into another object, and that's still valid, and it's still storytelling. And so like I don't know, I like all those aspects of the art of putting text onto clothes. And I just think like putting text onto clothes, the thing I was saying about the actant versus like a passive object, like how much more powerful as an actant an object becomes when it has human words on it. What? Like suddenly that object is able to tell that phrase to anyone who sees it without you needing to do it. Like I don't know, to me, uh, probably because I'm an art student at heart, that is like, oh, so powerful. My little heart is like, oh, it's still so exciting every time I talk about it. But maybe I'm just a little dork.
We're all no, I hear you. We're all dogs. I mean, we're all excited about what you're talking about as well.
Yeah.
So, actually, that brings me around to sort of the last question we sort of like to ask our guests, which is, what are you excited about now? It can be anything, not craft related, but yeah, just something that's like hyping you up right now that you love.
I'm always excited about things all the time. I think this is like a lovely, like, being neurodivergent is not always very fun, but my specific type comes with like quite a lot of excitement. And like, even though I get bored of things very quickly, the next thing is very exciting. So, but like, I guess specifically, I'm working on my art practice again and not just making things. Like, for the first time since my son was born 4 years ago, I really feel like I have the mental capacity to, like, do concepts and, like, think conceptually and have fun with that. So, like, I've been working on a project kind of folklore based with US wool just to, like, make something cool with their wool because I think it's so cool that it's, like, Scottish sheep processed in Scotland, made into the wool, and then going back to a maker who lives in Scotland and to tell a Scottish story. Like, I just like the circularity of that loop. And then I'm writing my first knitting pattern right now, which I am excited about. I am. It's just very overwhelming. But I'm learning how to do grading, which it's not something I like to do, like technical stuff, but it is very exciting and I'm really looking forward to like having that as a real skill. And I'm making a stripy dress right now, which is also very exciting. But yeah, there's so many exciting things that I could tell you about. But again, I would just be laying out like everything that's coming up. So I could probably stem it there. Mostly just the things I'm making.
They're good things to start with. Well, best of luck with all those projects. They are exciting.
Thank you.
I guess before we round up, we mentioned your Instagram, what Lydia made. If people want to find out more about you and gently stalk you in an authorized way, where should they go?
Oh, just my Instagram. I keep trying to have like a website and then failing, and then my computer died last week with my portfolio. So it's all on Instagram. I grasp on and pray for Instagram to stay supreme in terms of social media. But yeah, I mean, you can find me there. I'm sure like as soon as anybody follows me, they get like a huge dose of every personal thought I've ever had because that's how I use the stories. So just to warn them.
Well, I feel like anyone who's listened to this podcast and got this far knows that your personal thoughts are extremely interesting and worth listening to. So that is nothing but enticing, I would have thought.
Thank you. But yeah, it's been really fun chatting.
Yeah, thank you so
likewise.
much. Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
It's been our pleasure.
What a treat. What a treat to talk to Lydia, another Lydia.
I used to be very opposed to other Lydias, but I accept Lydia Morrow as an excellent Lydia, and all future Lydias now also allowed.
Oh, well, that's a relief that she passed that was the interview.
But yeah, seriously, it was so wonderful to talk to her, and I think you can probably tell listening to that interview how much we enjoyed everything she had to say, and we hope that you enjoyed it too.
Yeah. Just a reminder, we have all the show notes. So lots of beautiful photos about the work that Lydia was talking about are on the Pom Pom blog, so you can go check them out. And of course, you can check out all those photos and projects she was talking about on Lydia's Instagram, which is what Lydia made.
Of course, also the issue that Lydia worked on, issue 39. There'll be some of those pics on the blog as well, but of course you can find it on our website and in all the usual pom-pom places. And that just leaves us to say that, of course, this episode was sponsored by Pearl Soho. And don't forget that you can get 15% off, which I would say is a pretty generous discount, off your next order at pearlsoho.com by entering the code POMCASTFEB. So that's POMCASTFEB at checkout.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Paul Soho. Thank you, Lydia Morrow. And thank you guys for listening. We're very pleased to have you back in the Pomcast space. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Shared space here.
Well, take care, folks, and we'll see you next episode.
Bye.
Pomcast is produced by Lydia Gluck and Sophie Heathscott, along with the team at Pom Pom Quarterly magazine. You can buy your copy of the magazine and subscribe too at our online shop. That's pompommag.com/shop.
Big additional thanks this episode to Belinda Johnson, who helped us with the edit. And big thanks, as always, to Eli Block for creating the original music for this show and for being an essential part in creating this podcast. Thanks additionally to Portmanteau Music for the tracks we used in this episode.
Thanks as always to Megan Fernandez, co-creator and editor of Pom Pom Quarterly. And a big thanks to the whole Pom Pom team. We love you, and you make this podcast what it is.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and why not leave a review? 5 stars, please. Thank you. Send any feedback or ideas to podcast@pompommag.com, and don't forget to keep in touch with us via the